introductions this time. I know that we skipped them last time because we were in such a hurry, but hopefully we have ample time today. And one of the first things on our agenda will be to welcome the new transportation and TDM officer to Arlington Public Schools. He will be joining us. Maybe he's here already for at least a few moments. And so I thought for our introduction, we could each first say our name, and then for those who want, raise an issue relating to keeping kids safe on the streets around Arlington Public Schools. And a subsidiary question, how do we challenge the car culture in APS, especially at the high school level? And I'll start. My name is Cynthia Palmer, and this is an issue I think a lot about, growing up as I did in Brooklyn, and then being confronted with the enormous contrast of life in suburban Virginia, where it seems like a rite of passage that everyone by senior year drives a car or even possibly has a car. So there's a lot that needs to be done. There have been many serious accidents and even deaths around the schools in recent years. And APS is starting to feel like this is an all hands on deck kind of an issue. They want to become more engaged. And so my one suggestion is we coordinate between the BAC, PAC, TAC, ACTC, and C2E2 and try and come up with some recommendations for APS. So that's my starting point, and let's go around and see who's here. And we will start with the number 9A76AFFC. Yeah, is anyone on the phone or recognizing that number?
I'm on the phone, but I don't recognize that number. But I'll introduce myself. I'm Mejdi Shamali. I'm with the C2E2, just mentioned by Cynthia. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. And do you want to suggest anything for safety around the schools?
I think visibility and walkability, both of those things are really important. I think the schools kind of put us in a jam in that the walking zone is very large. So my oldest daughter is 2 miles away from her school. That would be a 40-minute walk in the morning. But that we can't fix. But generally adding visibility and more walking cross guards and those kind of things.
Great, thank you much, Dee. And next we have Chris Slatt.
Hi there, Chris Slatt, representing the Transportation Commission, and I live over on Columbia Pike in Penrose. It's hard to pick just one suggestion for improving safety around schools, but I guess I will pick my more out of the box suggestion, which is in order to improve safety for people walking and biking, the best thing we can do is have fewer cars around for people to potentially get hit by. And I think the best way to do that is to stop having parking at Arlington Public Schools be free. All parking at APS should have a nominal charge. I think that would be just enough to get people to think twice about just hopping in their car for every single event that's at a school, and instead think, hey, could save buck or two and we could just all walk over. It's a beautiful day.
Wonderful. Next we have Dana.
Yeah, Dana Briss. Enforcement. Enforcement can't be a 2 days once a week, 2 days in 1 week, once a year or twice a year effort. It has to be consistent and has to be rigorous. And if it should include the walk shed for the school, include the walk shed for the school. but don't don't say it's too hard.
Mhm. Excellent. David Ansel.
Yeah, David Ansell. I live in the Dover Crystal area, and I think lowering speeds is the best way to improve safety and to also piggyback off of Dana's comment, together with that, to have automatic photo enforcement or some kind of consistent enforcement of the lower speed limits in and around the school zones.
Fantastic. Elwin.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Alan with the Arlington County DES, and I live in DC, but my experiences here with DCPS has been there's much more focus on just getting people to drop off their kids in cars, which is very counterproductive. And a lot of the same parents raise issues saying how their kids don't feel safe walking and biking to school. So it's very much not just a school issue, but also it's an education issue for the parents and their guardians. So it's very much important that we have this be a multi-pronged process, that it's not just putting the blames on APS, for example, but that we put the blame on ourselves and our communities, and that we all just focus on getting people out of their cars and finding better ways to implement alternative solutions, such as the bike bus ideas that are being more prevalent in a lot of communities around the country.
Great. Eric Goodman.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, great. Well, there have been a lot of good suggestions. I guess maybe just a couple to add, sort of a little bit on the other side of the coin, but I think also might be helpful. One is just to educate kids in like traffic gardens and things like that, so they kind of understand where traffic is, what to watch for, how to be vigilant, with cars around, because cars aren't going to disappear. And then the other might be, again, with regard to visibility, is just kind of wearing bright things, make yourself visible, so you're less likely to be hit by drivers that tend to be distracted when they're in traffic. So just kind of on the other side of the coin, because there's already been so many good suggestions on the other side.
Very good. And I see you're wearing orange in line with your suggestion. Henry Dunbar.
Hi, everyone. Henry Dunbar. I'm with the Arlington County Commuter Services Active Transportation Programs, Bike, Walk, Cabbie, and Shared Mobility. I live in Douglas Park. In addition to all the other great suggestions, building on Eric's, I would make bike education mandatory at the second grade level with a graduation ride in the streets, so that parents know their children will be out there. And I think that would get a lot of their attention around this particular issue. So if I could wave my wand, do one thing, it would be all second graders across the board, just like we do with swimming education in third grades. Thank you.
I love that. Okay. Leah.
I have, I think, a few things as well, but I think the biggest is um, having low stress bicycle routes near APS schools, specifically at the high school and middle school level, um, with an emphasis on multi-use trails and connecting those to schools with protected bike lanes or any sort of off-road facility. That would be a big priority. Also, covered bike parking.
Ooh, yeah. Can we have that at all the grocery stores too? Noreen.
Oh, hi, everybody. I'm Noreen Hannigan. I'm also on the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission. I live in Dominion Hills. It's been a long time since I've had a kid in public schools, but I remember thinking about the high school thing. I don't know what the policy is now, but it just seemed odd to me that high school kids would drive to school when there's buses that are going anyway, it just seems like a waste of energy and more cars on the road.
Yeah, it is. Randy.
Hi, I'm Randy Swart. I live in Barcroft neighborhood. I'm right around the corner from Barcroft Elementary School, and I'd like to agree with Chris and Elwin that the real problem at Barcroft Elementary is all the parents who have to drop their kids off right in front of the school. They're all in a hurry. They're trying to get to work on time. It's a circus over there every day. And it's almost as bad when the kids get out, although they stagger the release to make sure it's not quite that bad. But we're still waiting for we're supposed to get additional traffic calming measures. And I'm really looking forward to seeing if they can do anything about straightening out the circus. Thank you.
Thank you. Raymond.
How's it going? Raymond Duran with Bike Arlington Program Manager. I guess one thing I would bring up with my past jobs being in education, I guess one good thing I would say is always looking at role models and what does good behavior look like. So people driving, people walking, people biking, all of those. What do those role models look like? What are those good behaviors? So that's always something for students to kind of look at and kind of strive for. You know, we're not perfect in any way, and we have busy lives and things going on. So what does that good behavior look like? So we can strive for all trying to be adding to the culture. Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron.
Hi there, I'm Aaron Schutz. I work at Yorktown, and it was real nice to have a non-student day today where the roads were a lot safer to be on because there weren't as many parents driving their kids to and fro. So the roads were so much nicer to bike on today, and I'd like to really see that going. Kevin, I'm glad you're on board with us here. I think whatever we can do to stop letting parents drive their kids all the time. The number of parents that are lined up at the end of the school day outside of Yorktown High School, it's like 50, 60 cars just idling there waiting for the bell to ring. And it's an endless train in the morning dropping kids off, not to mention all the students that, as was mentioned before, are driving their cars for no clear reason, because almost all of them can walk or bike to the school. I don't agree with Chris Slat's idea of charging people for a lot of equity reasons, but also because my students would pay $1,000 if they could get a parking spot to drive whatever car they've got. So we need to find some other mechanism in there, but I appreciate the discussion.
Thank you. That's interesting. I think you're right. Steve Offit.
Hi, my name's Steve Offit, and I live in Pentagon City, and I'm ostensibly the vice chair of this committee, although I don't really seem to do anything in that regard. First of all, I'm going to push back just slightly on the culture. It turns out that fewer than half of 18-year-old or 17 and 16-year-olds in the United States have a driver's license. This is different from 20 years ago, and there's been a drift away from getting your license as soon as you turn 16. Neither of my kids had their license until after they turned 18, and they didn't really want it. So I think working with that tendency of our teenagers to actually not really be that keen on getting a license the moment they turn 16 is something we can continue to work on. I just kind of disagree with the visibility thing, because by saying, oh, you got to be visible, you're also suggesting to people, whether they're children or not, that somehow it's dangerous, that they should be able to walk or bike somewhere, without having to put on something special, just to make sure that they don't get run over. I think that's a bad signal to send, even though it may be true. And I'm more on Chris Slat's side in terms of charging, but I think the charging needs to be daily. If you offer someone a annual sticker, then you're right. they'll just pay the $1,000 and they'll do it. But if every day they have to pay $5 on that really nice day, they could just walk or bike maybe and save the $5. Maybe they do it.
Thank you. And I would argue
It
actually
just means it
that
was at the apocalypse that just happened.
did it? I would argue that actually, I don't know the statistics, maybe Kevin knows them, but at least in some of our high schools, I think that students do get their licenses, the majority, before age 18. My my younger daughter got hers at 17 and said all of her friends already had them. She didn't know anyone else who didn't have one, and she just got hers. So I don't think that
Yeah, but
Arlington is
kids also
typical
say
for
all
the
their friends are
country.
drinking and all their friends are this and all their friends are that, but it's just not reality when you actually do the
I don't know.
numbers.
I'm sure we have statistics. I'm sure that somebody is surveying, the numbers in Arlington. So Kevin, you're next. Welcome. Good to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Treacle. I am the new Transportation Demand Manager Specialist for APS. And luckily for me, I have seen it on both sides as a retired detective from ACPD and one who have presented at the driver's license ceremony every year for the last 10 years prior to the pandemic, in which the courtroom was filled with new drivers, at least new permit holders, if you will. Um, I've seen an increase of the courtroom being filled with those. Now, I will say, as kids get a little older, maybe the joy of driving kind of decreases a little bit based on everything that's going on. But as that 16-year-old who's eligible to get a permit, the courtroom has always been filled with the new driver and a parent. I would agree with Chris in a couple of ways. We definitely have to put things together in order to discourage um, the driving behavior. That's one of my plans as the TDM specialist is to go and speak with every PTA in the school district. It has to start somewhere. Unfortunately, from the PD side, speaking from experience, unfortunately, there's just not enough staffing to be out there every single day. I know there's a heavy presence every September and the beginning of October, but as everything else, that presence always declines. And of course, halfway through the school year, now parents figured out that there's no one's going to be there. So I'm just going to park here and run in and do what I have to do and come back. That's why I don't think charging would be an influence because they're going to do that anyway, even if they don't have a sticker or if they haven't purchased something. A lot of parents will just come in, park on the side, no parking, or permit parking or whatever, and just use the excuse, oh, I'm just running in to get my kid. So I'll be okay because I'm only going to take 5 minutes. When that 5 minutes turn into 15 minutes because the kid's not in the office or for many reasons. And now we have 5 or 6 parents who have parked illegally and blocking up the entrance for potential buses that need to get there and the whole nine. But there are multiple things of resources that we can use to address these problems. But I think the median thing is everyone has to work together. Is the neighborhoods, APS, and all of the other resources, we all definitely have to work together to come up with at least a solution to deter, number one, the traffic, deter the driving behavior, and deter those who are making it unsafe for our kids to be walking, biking, or whatever mode of transportation that they use to get to the school. So that's where I am.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Does anybody have questions or things to raise for Kevin?
And I would like to say one thing. If there's no questions, I apologize. Just want to take a couple minutes. There are various resources and programs that I'm coordinating with, like with Henry Dunbar, working with him, Leah, and also Raymond for various resources that they and organizing and programs that they had to try to spread out to the APS community as far as the schools. I think each district or each level has a little different issue. Like elementary schools and middle schools, their issues are a little different from the high schools. And then once we start addressing one level at a time, and then I agree with that early education, that's definitely a bonus to get them educated about the safety and getting there as early as possible, and then create that behavior. And then, unfortunately, we'll still have to worry about the parents. But as long as at least one of the two has some type of education and know that, you know what, this may not be the right thing to do. So that will help with the safety of the kids getting to school to and from. But it's still going to be a collaborative effort for everyone. And again, working with DES as well. Hopefully we can maneuver or manipulate some of the no parking signs where buses can easily get in and out of places. Unfortunately, in some of the neighborhoods where some of the schools are located, the lanes for the buses are just so narrow, it's hard. And to be honest with you, I would not park my personal vehicle on one of those streets because it's just a matter of time where sway 3 inches to the left or 3 inches to the right will cause that side swipe, not alone to navigate or try to navigate. Unfortunately, those parents who fail to realize that there's a no parking sign there for a reason. Unfortunately, some folks tend to think that that no parking sign is not designed for their vehicle, it's for other people's vehicles. So we're all trying to work together, I think, as resources uh, with the end goal of safety for the kids. I will mention that I have worked with Dr. Wright over at Oak Ridge Elementary with the uh, walking school bus. I think that's an excellent program. And my plan is to uh, re reintroduce that to all of the elementary schools by the end of this school year, with hopes of getting a lot of participation starting up for the beginning of 2023-24 school year. There's a lot of groups that there's a senior citizen group that's willing and have worked with the community up in Oak Ridge that are willing to spread the wealth, if you will. They have several volunteers who do get vetted, who wants to participate in the program, and it's a win-win. Definitely for the senior citizens, it's a win. I think for the parents, where you can see your child getting to school safely in a group, it's a win-win. And then for the kids, I think number one, they get their exercise in. They now start learning safe practices when getting to schools. So I think that's just a win-win program all the way around. And my goal is to try to introduce all of at least as many elementary schools as I can. Those who I have found through research have a good ratio of walkers. So I definitely want to get them started first if I can. And then that's a start. That's a start. Did someone answer? I think I saw a hand regarding TDM, and that's Transportation Demand Management. That's what TDM stands for.
And it looks like Chris has a hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I wasn't ready with my question earlier. I hadn't realized we had moved out of the introduction section into the full agenda. I thought Kevin was just introducing himself like everybody else. My first question is, in the past we had two sort of transportation focused people at APS. We had Safe Routes to School coordinator, and we had this TDM position. My understanding is APS is leaving the Safe Routes to School coordinator position open at this time for budget reasons. Do you have both sets of responsibilities on your plate right now, or is what the Safe Routes to School coordinator did kind of falling by the wayside, and you're focused on the traditional TDM job responsibilities?
No, both of those tasks has fallen onto my plate as well, to include TDM. So I have all of that on my plate right now.
Well, we certainly look forward to working with you, and if maybe at a future meeting, because I guess you're just getting started in this new role, and so maybe you can come back and we can strategize and coordinate with the pedestrian advisory committee and with the other committees if there are things that you would like to push forward and get lots of different groups singing in a choir. We can try and do that.
Absolutely, I'm definitely willing and want to do that. I also work with all of the crossing guards, so I get some feedback from them as well, what they see coming in and what they have to deal with, and get some of their suggestions. So I'm kind of their liaison as well, and obviously with the police department in the special operations section, in which that's where the crossing guards, who they fall under that umbrella. So I'm definitely working with them on a daily, almost, to either address certain issues or find people who can follow up with them to help me address whatever issues that they may have, like traffic, or right now we have issues with e-scooters being dropped off everywhere. But once again, this isn't new. This has been occurring for the last 6 years now that they've come into play here in the county. And I know that there have been different avenues of addressing that, but now it seems like that behavior is picking up even more. And I wanted to remind people, I try to remind people that things aren't the same as 10 years ago. There are more people on the road, there are more bikes on the road, there are more kids walking. And unfortunately, the schools aren't getting bigger, the streets aren't getting bigger. And so we have to learn how to adapt to all of those changes and increases with everything around us. So hopefully together we can come up with uh, some plans to address all of the increases of transportation. And like I said, I guess the goal is to minimize some of the vehicles, but now you forced the bicyclers and the people who ride the electric scooters. Now we putting them into harm's way, if you will, especially when they're not following traffic directions like they should. Unfortunately, there was an accident about a week and a half ago where a person on an electric scooter wasn't following traffic direction like that driver was supposed to, and there was an accident. So again, I continue to go along with education and putting that out there to everyone so that everyone can get to and from safely.
There is a question, a hand for Randy.
I'd just like to say this is a breath of fresh air. I really wanted to hear that APS had somebody who was working on the problem, because it's been a problem for as long as I can remember. And Kevin, I think you're just going to be really welcome here anytime you want to come back.
Great, thank you. I definitely will. I definitely will.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. We appreciate everything you're doing. And now I guess we better keep moving because already I think we're behind. So Leah is next up to talk about South George Mason Drive.
I can go ahead and share my screen. I'm definitely going to skip some slides and just get to the most important information for this group. But all these slides are posted on the website. If you have any questions, I'll have kind of a discussion at the end. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So today I'm going to be talking about the South George Mason Drive Multimodal Corridor Study. This is something that's been going on for about a year now. We're in phase 3, so we're really looking at intersections. So today I'm going to be giving kind of a brief study overview. I'll just touch lightly on existing conditions engagement, so what we heard through phase 1, talk a little bit about data analysis that was also part of phase 1, talk about what we heard during phase 2, which was corridor-wide cross sections, and then today I'll really want to focus on the intersection concepts, and I'll just touch on next steps as well. So a brief study overview, just to kind of set the scene. So the purpose of the study is really to develop a preliminary plan to improve safety and access along South George Mason Drive for people who are, walking, rolling, riding transit, cycling, and driving, because it is a multimodal study. And you can see some of the ways in the ways that it's really informed. So you have county planning guidance, including the Master Transportation Plan and Vision Zero. We have data analysis and research, which is really related to traffic volumes and traffic speed and vehicular movements. And then also interdepartmental coordination. So, we had to balance kind of the priorities of, CPHD and, the fact that we have form-based code on Columbia Pike, as well as with, Department of Parks and Recreation, maintaining tree canopy. So kind of balancing priorities internally. And then last but definitely not least, public engagement. So what we heard from the community. To kind of bring some context to what we're looking at. So essentially we're looking at a 2-mile portion of South George Mason Drive. It's really starting at Arlington Boulevard, or Route 50, as you can see up here. And then it goes all the way down to generally the county line of Fairfax around South Dinwiddie Street. And the corridors were generally broken up into kind of these 3 segments that are, generalizations are not necessarily the same throughout with the width of the right of way. But this was specifically done to kind of break it into more manageable portions. So existing conditions, I'm going to run through some of these briefly because it did impact, when we came up with these intersection concepts. So we had a community kickoff meeting, we had an online feedback questionnaire and a map that was open for a little less than a month. And then we had these 2 in-person walking tours. And in existing conditions, we were really asking people, what do you like about South George Mason Drive? What do you not like? How are you using it now? So just some things to note. I think that people are, using it to reach destinations. You can see about 70% use the corridor to reach things on South George Mason. So it's not a place that people are just passing through. And you can see here, we asked people how safe they felt traveling on South George Mason. Biking, using a scooter, and walking, generally very unsafe or unsafe. And that it increases as you get to driving and transit. And then this is important specifically for phase 3, focusing on intersections. When we ask people, what change would you like to see on each segment, they were the same across all 3. And safer intersections was 50%. So half of people that took this online questionnaire said safer intersections, followed by protected bike lanes, slower traffic, and then crosswalks were also pretty high up on the list. Gonna keep moving. Data analysis. So basically, we just collected some data to see kind of how traffic was moving. And it's very apparent that there is a speed issue on South George Mason Drive. The speed limit is 30 miles per hour, and you can see that we have, we have 6% and 5% of drivers, on these segments going 40 miles an hour over, which is a huge concern considering we have, schools, we have parks, people live along South George Mason Drive. So this is something we really want to remedy through the study and through Vision Zero as well. One thing to note, after kind of this existing conditions engagement and phase 2, which I'll talk about in a minute, we needed to look more closely at parking. So we did this parking utilization study. Basically what we found was that on average, about 60 to 70% of all available parking spaces were used during the weekdays. And then this was about lower at 55% during the weekends. And then we broke that down kind of for each segment. I think it's important for segment 1 because this is the only segment where we're talking about parking removal. I think it's important to note that less than half of the available parking spots were used on the weekends, and during the weekdays, utilization was between about 50 and 60%. So corridor-wide concepts, what we heard. This was phase 2, and we had these kind of cross sections that I'll show in a minute. We had a virtual community meeting, once again, that online feedback questionnaire, and this time we had an in-person community workshop and open house. So transportation priorities here, once again, dedicated bikeway and sidewalks and vehicular travel lanes were kind of at the top. And then we had these preferred alternatives that I'll show in a minute, but generally it was kind of between, I guess I can break it down for this group, a multi-use trail with improved sidewalks and buffer space versus kind of on-street bicycle facilities. So this is what's here today. On segment 1, this is from Arlington Boulevard to Columbia Pike, as you can see on this graphic up in the right-hand corner. And then this was the preferred concept that was kind of preferred by the community, as well as matched up with planning guidance and interdepartmental kind of coordination and data analysis, those 4 factors I talked about at the beginning. So you can see we have a 12-foot trail on the, I guess I could say, northbound side with a 4-foot buffer. We do remove parking on this side and have reduced the vehicular lanes. The outside lane on either side are still 11 feet because transit needs that to be able to function. And then we maintain parking on the southbound side and also have an improved sidewalk because it was not ADA compliant in its current form. Segment 2, so this is from Columbia Pike to South 4 Mile Run Drive, kind of predominantly in the Barcroft Apartments area. This is what's here today. And this is what was kind of the preferred concept. So we're maintaining that trail on the northbound side, adding some space, having that buffer strip still, and maintaining parking, once again, reducing vehicular lanes, and then reducing the median as well, which is something we really coordinated with DPR on. And once again, having a 6-foot sidewalk. And then finally, segment 3. So this is from South 4 Mile Run Drive to the county line. This is what's here today. And the preferred concept, once again, has that 12-foot trail on the northbound side, a buffer space for tree canopy. We've maintained parking, reduced the vehicular lanes, and reduced the median. And there's also 6-foot sidewalk on the other side. That was a very quick overview, but I want to focus on intersection concepts because this is what we're kind of collecting feedback on right now. So essentially, we have these 3 main intersections that people were really concerned with, and 2 of these are Vision Zero hotspots, meaning they have high amounts of crash rates. So Columbia Pike and South 4 Mile Run Drive are considered Vision Zero hotspots. So we knew, we really need to focus on safety in these areas. So Arlington Boulevard is going to look a little different than Columbia Pike and South 4 Mile Run Drive from a concept kind of perspective, because we have to kind of coordinate with VDOT on this because we don't really own this portion because we don't own the bridge. So we kind of have a short term and a long term. So this is what's here today. We have a pretty narrow sidewalk with 5 feet on that northbound side, really wide vehicular lanes, 4-foot concrete median, and this kind of same thing mirrored on that other side. So our kind of short-term solution you can see here, and when we say short-term, we mean working within the confines of the bridge that's already existing. So some of the things you can see here is the narrowing of vehicular travel lanes. Basically, by reducing those travel lanes down, we'll be able to kind of fit a protected bike lane in on both sides. That would be about 5 feet of space with a 2-foot buffer with these kind of precast concrete barrier curbs. And we've already received some feedback, can we have, more vertical protection, which is something, that would be great to hear from this group, I think, from specifically. And then I also want to note that, because there is a bike lane, these sidewalks are still very narrow, but it does kind of reduce the stress of pedestrians because rather than being up against vehicular traffic, there is a bike lane there. So this is kind of the long-term solution. So this is if basically VDOT ever decides to rebuild this bridge. We reached out to them and they aren't planning to do anything in the near future, but it's basically we want to kind of put this out there so when it does get rebuilt, they'll have this guidance. So you can see, we have wider sidewalks to improve the pedestrian experience. We have an 8-foot sidewalk kind of on that southbound side, and then you can see that east side trail is continued over the bridge. It's about 12 feet. And once again, we've reduced the vehicular lanes as well. And there is vertical protection on the multi-use trail. Then we get to Columbia Pike. This is what's here today. This is just an aerial view. And then this is what we're proposing here. And there's some bullet points on kind of the major changes. I think the things that are important to note, for this group specifically, are the wider sidewalks, updated curb ramps that'll improve accessibility, shorter crosswalks with curb bump outs, because that was something we heard, quite a bit about in existing conditions. And then also, that trail is going through on that east side or southbound side as well. One thing that you can't see illustrated here are kind of the traffic signalization. So here, we'd really aim to change the traffic signals to allow full or partial phase separation for trail users that are crossing Columbia Pike on that South George Mason Drive kind of trail. And then there's just some space reallocation and then just some lane combinations that are actually a part of the Columbia Pike multimodal street improvements. And before I talk about South 4 Mile Run Drive, I just want to mention briefly the additional evaluation. So as many of you probably noticed, we were initially going to have this phase 3 community engagement in January of this year, but essentially we really wanted some time to look at South 4 Mile Run Drive just because it's such a complicated intersection. You have 2 intersections, South 4 Mile Run major and minor right next to each other. There's high incidence of crashes. There was just an incident with a pedestrian. So we wanted to take some time to really focus on this intersection to see what we could do. And kind of basically what we did is sim traffic modeling. So we basically looked at kind of these 3 questions. So what are the impacts of, having a totally separated trail crossing, the impacts of rerouting the ART or Route 72 or having a transit only lane, and then just analyzing how to kind of restrict and simplify traffic phasing, specifically looking at how to reduce conflicts with the trail crossings because the W&OD crosses that area as well. So this is what's here today. And then this is what we have proposed. And I should say this is the traditional option is what I will call it. You have kind of these wider sidewalks, once again, with the curb ramps, shorter crosswalks with bump outs. Once again, that shared use trail is going through that southbound or east side. And then we're kind of changing the traffic signals to kind of protect this trail. So we're restricting, the left turn movement from South 4 Mile Run Drive Minor, which I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, to South George Mason Drive. And then also having full phase separation between trail users crossing South 4 Mile Run Drive Major and drivers who are turning across the trail. And this is kind of the exploratory concept, is what I'll call it. This is a peanut about. So essentially, this is a really complicated intersection, and we wanted to kind of think outside the box. So there's this treatment, as you can see here, it's called a peanut about because it's kind of a peanut-shaped roundabout. It's been used kind of in a few locations, specifically on the East Coast, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. And you can see it kind of aims to reduce speeds while maintaining traffic flow, and also provides a kind of safe setback crossings because it's a Dutch-style roundabout design. And then we also have some general crossing improvements, and these are really based on kind of what we heard in phase 1, where people were concerned about intersections and crossings. So you can see some of them on the map here. I'm going to go through these for this group. If you have any questions, you can let me know. And then next steps here, this is where we are now. The community meeting on intersection concepts was last month. And so we basically kicked things off on March 22nd when we had that virtual community meeting. And now we have an online feedback form that is open for comment through April 23rd, I believe it is now. And we've had a few pop-ups. There was one last week at Barcroft. There will be another one this Thursday, April 13th, from 3 to 5 p.m. at Barcroft Apartments. And then we also will be having one at Centro on Columbia Pike. That is all I had. That was a very consolidated and fast talking presentation. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I think we have about 10 minutes for questions or comments.
That was amazing.
Thank
And
you.
I want
Sorry
to
if
know
that was
more
very
about
quick.
the peanut.
Yeah, the peanut about is a popular one. One thing I should mention really quick is that so this will basically become a capital project after this. We are looking at a lane reduction for segment 3. So from South 4 Mile Run Drive to the county line, we are looking at the feasibility of having it just be one vehicular lane in each direction. Just throwing that out there.
Great. I think Eric Goodman had a hand up, maybe?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if I understood correctly from what I saw there. There's only going to be, I guess, a sidewalk on one side of the road. Is that what you're showing? For certain segments?
Oh, it's basically there'll either be a 12-foot multi-use trail or a sidewalk. So like on this one, for example, you have this 12-foot multi-use trail and then just a sidewalk on the other side. So there'll be a pedestrian facility on both sides, and then this will be a pedestrian and a bike facility on that northbound side.
Okay, well that I guess that makes a little more sense. It just it kind of shows it as kind of separated just for bikes, so it will be kind of signed as a multi-use trail.
Yep.
Okay.
Definitely.
Good.
Which also means we have to go slower and watch out for dog leashes.
Yes.
And then there would be a lot of safe intersections since all the bikers, some of the bikers are going the other, needs to get on the other side.
Yeah, that's something we need to talk about with wayfinding and signage as well. But we do think if someone really wanted to go really fast and zoom, they could do that in the roadway. But generally, the trail will be for users who are kind of willing to go at a kind of pace where you're amongst pedestrians. But really what the thought was that we could have kids be able to bike from Arlington Boulevard, where Bridget Obakoya is working on Arlington Boulevard Trail Project, bike all the way down to Wakefield. And then you have Alcova Heights Park. We really wanted to keep it on this side and have a multi-use trail, focusing on kind of parks and schools.
Got it. Steve.
Yeah, I'm actually really impressed with that the idea of having the trail all the way from Arlington Boulevard to the end of the county. Well done. I think that would be a really great facility to have. So thanks. But I think what Cynthia might have been getting at is those who are traveling southbound on the two-way cycle multi-use track who need to then get off to go another way. We need to think through those intersection logistics, right? Because not everyone is a through traveler.
Right.
Yeah.
And Chris.
Thanks. I wanted to echo, I think this project has come along fantastically, and I'm really pleased with the outcome, even though this is not the alternative that I lobbied for. A couple things I wanted to say. I'm really excited to hear staff talking about phase separation at these intersections. I do think, especially given the grade change along George Mason Drive, going from north to south, it is pretty downhill for a good chunk of things.
Yeah.
Some bikes are probably going to pick up some decent speed. And that always makes me worry about like a left turning driver that's southbound on George Mason turning onto Columbia Pike or something like that, and not expecting a fast moving bike to be coming down the trail from behind them. So that's great. I do hope there's some consideration being given to some of the, I think, what would be considered more minor intersections. I think the one right there at Alcova Heights Park, especially 7th Street, is kind of in this like weird middle ground of an intersection where it sees a lot more than your average neighborhood street, but a lot less than something like Columbia Pike. Should be a candidate for phase separation too, especially given that part of the trail is probably going to see a whole lot more kids than some of the other parts of the trail. So that would be great to see as well. And I do think there are still a couple extra lanes kicking around here or there on George Mason at some of these intersections, especially still at Columbia Pike, that aren't needed for phase separation that, you know, I would love to see us drop that asphalt and give people a shorter crossing distance. So expect to hear more from me on that as well.
Yeah, that's fair.
Awesome.
That's a good point.
Thanks, Leah. This is great.
You.
Great. And Randy's next.
Well, one of the things I wanted to say was what Chris just said, that it's striking that when you show the intersections, there are many more lanes on the George Mason side than there are on the Pike. You know, the Pike has been put together in a very, there you go. Pike has been put together in a very logical way to try to keep pedestrian distances short. And here we are with George Mason, which has a lot less traffic than the Pike, I think. And you've got like 4 lanes, you've got a left turn, 2 throughs and a right turn. That just seems excessive. The other thing is, I'm still disappointed that you didn't do anything about closing off 4 Mile Run Minor. I don't think, short of the peanut might be decent, actually, it might work out. But short of that, I don't think there's any way you can really make that a safe intersection while 4 Mile Run Minor is still there and is still being used. Thank you. And I realize that there's some kind of transit thing there, but it seems to me that transit people might have to make an accommodation as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Randy. That's a good point, and I'll take notes kind of all of these, and then also if you could submit that on the questionnaire, which I'm sure you already have, that would be great. I think as far as South 4 Mile Run Drive, it's kind of, it's a goal, but it's very abstract and not really in the county's control. But we will be working with Barcroft redevelopment and talking about separating minor from major if it's possible through that project. So it's a very far out idea, but that is something we would be kind of willing to work with them on. Because I agree, this intersection, you know, is just really difficult because you have minor and major right next to each other. And, you know, the best thing we could do, you know, in this situation is the peanut about, but if we had the opportunity to move minor and major away from each other, that would be ideal.
So would you like to explain the peanut to us a little bit further?
Yeah, I can pull that up. So essentially, let me go ahead and do my full screen. Oh, we're gonna go all the way from the beginning. I'm just gonna share like this. So the idea with the peanut about, I think there's kind of a few things I want to draw attention to. So one of them is that, you know, you have these kind of dashed lines here. That means, you know, a car can go to a different lane. You can't quite see it from this, but this is kind of a vertical delineation here. So cars would not be able to kind of pass at this point. So really, what you have here, cars naturally kind of have to slow down here because you have a crossing, and then just generally have to go slower and they can kind of go around. The idea is really that it kind of, reduces speeds, and it has been proven to reduce speeds, while also kind of providing just a better way for pedestrians to navigate. A lot of the issues and crashes that we've been having have to do with people queuing and getting impatient at the traffic signals, and having fender benders, or worse, um, because it's just the signalization is just really complicated. And if you aren't used to this intersection, it's very confusing. And even as someone who's used it quite a few times, it's just still, at rush hour, people are trying to get through at the end of the day. It's backed up. And as a pedestrian, you're traveling really far across. Sometimes there's not even really enough time to get across, walking or really biking. I think another thing to note is that you have the WNOD trail here. So essentially you would kind of cross up here, come north, and then cross back down to the WNOD trail. One thing we have been hearing from people is, what about a bridge, kind of like what we have at the WNOD trail over Langston Boulevard? That's also not out of the question. That's just something that we would talk more about in kind of the capital project phase, specifically because we'd have to work pretty closely with Nova Parks, who owns that land, and then also Dominion, who has kind of their power lines that are pretty large on that land as well.
Steve.
Yeah, thanks. Can you point us to any actual real peanut abouts that exist? Just put something in the chat, maybe a link or something. I'd be curious because it's the first time there's a lot of things about it that are interesting and kind of appealing. So that'd be cool.
Yeah.
But
I'll
I
put these in the
do,
chat.
yeah, I would say that it does seem like for the WNOD trail, I think you have to cross 8 lanes of traffic now, whereas before you just got weighted and a signal would get you across. So, despite the fact that sometimes left turning traffic was, nerve wracking, but it feels like this would be more inconvenient than the current situation for the trail users, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chris.
Thank you. It's kind of a piggyback on Steve's question, which is, can you point me to a multi-lane existing peanut about? Because the only one I'm familiar with is the one in Cambridge, which is single lane.
Yeah.
And kind of the nice thing about the single lane one in Cambridge is it has kind of a straight pass through for pedestrians in where the peanut, kind of almost meets in the center. Which I understand why it's not here is because you've got to cross multiple lanes to do it, and that's what we're trying to get rid of. So I would love to see a multi-lane existing one. Thank you.
Yeah, I can post it in the chat. I think Elwin posted one in the chat as well. I think there's like 3 that I know of in the US at this point.
David.
Yes, I'm just curious, Leah, as to kind of big picture. I know you said you're at a particular point in the study. What does the big picture look like with respect to, when this might go to design and construction and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the goal after this is we're going to kind of have an executive summary that'll be kind of available for the public. And then this will kind of serve as an internal resource to use when we're doing kind of the capital program budget, I guess this upcoming year, to be able to get this in the CIP. I would expect that segment 3, so that's, South 4 Mile Run to the county line, as well as segment 2 from Columbia Pike to South 4 Mile Run Drive, would be prioritized as CIP projects before segment 1, just because of the Vision Zero hotspots, as well as just some of the grant applications kind of lend themselves better to these segments if we were to kind of do a mix of CIP funding and maybe some grant applications. But honestly, I can't give a detailed response on the time. I think really right now we just want to get it in the CIP to be completed sometime in the next, 10 years. But that's all the detail I have right now, unfortunately.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I should mention that Vision Zero is currently looking at doing speed reduction on South George Mason Drive, which would be implemented much quicker than a capital project. There's also a few other projects on this corridor, and I think we recognize that there's a need to do something more quickly than a CIP project, because obviously with the Vision Zero hotspots and just the speeding on this corridor, we want to do something more quickly in the interim to kind of improve safety and conditions before we implement a whole CIP project.
Are you able to do any like speed humps or vertical um, provisions on such a big roadway? Or
Yeah, I don't think we'd be able to do speed humps, but I think like one thing is doing the lane reductions, like reducing the widths of the lanes will kind of make people go slower. And then I need to kind of talk with Christine about what they have planned um, as far as kind of speed reduction through Vision Zero. Like, because I did just get back from my trip in Europe, I'm now just like chock full of ideas at speed reduction. They have like just a lot of one of these almost like bump outs that are just so narrow, you really have no choice but to slow down. So I'm almost wondering if we can kind of use that on some of the smaller side streets, specifically where there's kind of topography and where people are going downhill. If you're coming from Wakefield traveling north, that big hill lends itself to people going faster. So kind of looking at some of those things.
fantastic. Well, I'm glad you went on your trip.
Yeah.
All right. David Ansell, I think your hand is still up from before, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes,
Oh, no
sorry.
worries. No worries. Okay. Anyone else? Should we move right along down the road, I think? Next thing is Shirlington Road. So that's with Ellen.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Let's see. I can share my screen. Sorry, I got a little too sucked in with the peanut about projects around the country. There's actually a ton of examples in Indiana, surprisingly. Let's see. Okay, share my screen.
I'm from Indiana, and I can fully vouch that Carmel, Indiana is the land of roundabouts. It's wild.
Oh yeah, there was that great article in
Yeah.
the New York Times or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. So, as everyone's aware, I'm sure everyone's aware of this pedestrian crossing here at the 4 Mile Run Trail, where it links up with the WNOD trail. I guess before I start, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, we're using this new mapping software that's providing much more clear maps than Google Maps, which I've been geeking out the past few days. But basically, we're looking at some kind of study regarding how to improve this existing crossing, or ensuring that people have a safer way to get across Shirlington Road, where the WNOD trail meets with Shirlington Road at the 4 Mile Run Drive, and where it meets up with the 4 Mile Run Trail. So as of right now, I'm sure everyone's aware that there's an existing rectangular rapid flashing beacon at this crossing where it meets Jenny Dean Park, which was just recently finished. But there's been a lot of concerns, and there's still a lot of issues, even though this is a much safer crossing than it used to be. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that people of all ages, of all abilities, have the ability to walk and bike across Arlington Road, which I'm sure everyone's aware that how busy it is. And I was looking at some traffic counts, and it looks like the latest ones from 2021 that VDOT have done have shown that there's about 17,000 cars a day post-pandemic, and I'm sure it's much higher now, but I could keep digging through the data. But yeah, we're basically going to start kicking off a study about trying to collect data to see how we can, first understand the problem fully, and then find a solution. Whether it's a short-term solution or it's more much more of a longer-term capital project. So yeah, we're gonna start collecting bike ped crossing data, not just at this crossing, but also at this existing crosswalk at the 4 Mile Run Drive and Shirlington Road intersection. Just basically comparing how many people are crossing at both locations, but not just counting how many people are walking and biking, but also the direction of travel to get a better idea of, the total movements, to get a better idea of what solution we could be presenting to the community. So yeah, we'll be installing cameras within the next few weeks, and then collecting data during 2 weekdays and then 1 weekend, depending on the weather. We may go out there multiple weeks. But yeah, just getting a better idea for how many people are crossing and where exactly they're going. Yeah, I just wanted to ask the group what their experiences have been with this new installation. I guess it's been out there for a while now, but there's been a lot of concerns from the community that this isn't going far enough as it should. There was a lot of demand for some kind of improvements prior to this. Back in the day, this was just a crosswalk, and DES went ahead and installed this flashing beacon, which we've been looking at data from before and after it's been installed, and it looks like speeds have been reduced. The latest data I've been looking at looks like speeds have been reduced by 24% compared to how it used to be before installation. But yeah, that's definitely something we want to take a look at. But yeah, I guess I just want to open up to the floor and just share your experiences, and we could have a bigger conversation about what we could do, the things that we should be looking at.
And before we dive in with issues, so what is your timeline on this study?
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. That's a really good question. We're looking to have some kind of study package that we can present to the committee and within our folks in the department, hopefully within the next month. As soon as we get the cameras out there, it's just a matter of us sifting through the data, tracking how many movements are happening. So once those are on the ground, then we can get pretty up to date, up to speed.
Great. Let's start with Pam.
Hi, I'm glad I was able to catch that part of the meeting, especially this part.
Yeah.
I go over these intersections all the time and they're horrible. Elwin, are you studying the actual 4 Mile Run Trail crossing, which is on the south part of your diagram here, where it crosses Shirlington Road, and there is a rapid flashing beacon, which drivers just routinely ignore, and the button for it is on the wrong side of the trail on both sides, and it's really risky to cross there. So I hope you fix that as part of this, and I hope you're studying that. I have found crossing at 4 Mile Run Drive and Shirlington Road, either of those corners, risky at best. So good luck. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Pamela. I've biked this area a few times, and each time it does seem challenging. And whenever I ride, Google Maps directs me to take the sidewalks, which I'm a pretty confident and experienced bike rider, so I'd rather not, especially with folks waiting at the bus stops or people walking their dogs on the sidewalk. It'd be much better if this was some kind of maybe a grade separated facility, for example. But yeah, before we do anything, it's important that we get as much data as possible, not just counting folks crossing the street, but talking to people and their experiences. So this is definitely helpful, and I agree with you. Just pushing a button to get some lights turned on isn't enough. And there's a lot of folks, despite the yield rates that we have for other similar installations around the county, that they could be better.
Yeah, it's the false sense of security that is so terrifying, seeing children cross and then jump back. And it's happened so many times when I go through there. Let's go on to Steve.
Yeah, I think we could go on and on about the issues here. But you have kind of two different times. One is when there isn't a lot of traffic, and then you have the drivers going relatively fast. I think my experience has been that the northbound drivers are the more dangerous ones. I think the southbound drivers tend to have a little better sight line maybe, and then they can see if someone's going to cross, but that direction going northbound, the ones particularly who've turned right off the expressway or have just gotten the light, tend to just go right on through. And those are the ones that tend to be, in my opinion, more oblivious to what's going on. And then there's the issue when traffic is backed up and then the cars, just happen to be parked right on top of the crossing, which creates an entirely different issue. You have at least two completely different kinds of problems. You have the safety issue with drivers not aware that there's a crossing or ignoring it. Maybe they are aware and ignoring it. And those that are just sitting there, making it impossible to actually cross because there are people there. So just keep in mind that you're dealing with more than one kind of a problem. But one small thing that could be done, I don't know if it'll have any effect at all, but it costs almost nothing, would be to put that striping on the roads that causes wheels to go bump, 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 ahead of that crossing. In addition to the flashing signal, the more ways we can warn riders there's something, or drivers that there's something happening, might be just one little tiny extra thing that will help improve safety there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We tend to install these little tiger teeth, shark teeth that we call them, to let people know that there's a crossing coming, a pedestrian crossing.
No, what I'm talking about are those ones that actually make you can hear them when you drive over them. They go bop, 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 bop,
Right.
Yeah, that's, so that there's some sort of, you get different senses, right? So you have visual, now you have, audible and sensory. The more ways you're warning people that there's something happening, the more likely is they might notice one.
Right, I agree. I was going to say that, this is the typical standard that we have for the crosswalks, but we can go beyond that and include rumble strips as well, or some kind of other indicators to let drivers know that there's a crossing approaching.
Chris?
Thanks. Super excited to see the study moving forward. Fought hard for this study. I think it's really important. I just wanted to give some personal experience because I bike through this intersection with my kids on a fairly regular basis. And for us, we have a pretty good experience when we're coming from the W&OD trail and trying to continue on the 4-mile run trail. So, we're heading eastward, we're on the W&OD, we cross there at 4-mile run drive. That crossing I used to consider pretty hairy. The county's made a lot of operational improvements to that over the years. I think we've gotten to a pretty good place. It's not perfect. The no turn on red for southbound Shirlington Road drivers has made a big difference because they seem to be complying with it most of the time, which is great. So I feel like we can usually, safely cross Shirlington Road there at the light. We come down the sidewalk on along Shirlington Road. We get on the 4-mile run trail heading east off to, Alexandria or whatever, and everything is lovely. When things get really hairy is when we're coming back, and inevitably they want to stop for ice cream in Shirlington, because in that case we're coming west on the 4-mile run trail, and we really want to cross at that rapid flashing beacon in order to head down into Shirlington. And it's the compliance of that rapid flashing beacon. Just really, I'd love to do a study on it because it's not what the statistics say that the compliance is supposed to be for a rapid flashing beacon. We've got a lot of cranky drivers. I think many of them just came off of the interstate that are used to going as fast as they want on 395, and now all of a sudden we're expecting them to stop for some kids in a crosswalk, and they're just not ready to do it. So in my opinion, and everybody has a different experience with this intersection, the thing that is really, really, really problematic is for people like me and the kids heading to ice cream in Shirlington, which is trying to come from 4-mile run trail down into Shirlington, or from down into Shirlington east onto the 4-mile run trail, because I at least consider that intersection with 4-mile run drive north of there, if you're trying to connect to the W&OD, I'm pretty comfortable on that with that on my kids. Not quite as comfortable as I'd like to be, but man, we're really we're getting close there. So that's just my 2 cents. Appreciate that this study's moving forward.
Eric Goodman.
Yeah, I guess one question is, why couldn't you treat this as like one big, long, sort of oblong intersection, and put a second, or basically put a control light that actually includes this crossing with the other crossing on the other end? It seems to me, just again, this is not a great place for a rapid flash beacon just because of the very poor compliance. But if you could somehow create, again, maybe an elongated intersection that might, allow for crossing on either end during a light cycle.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. It's a really unique intersection, and I agree. It probably makes sense to study this as one giant elongated intersection. Since the new park has been built, 27th Street now is kind of just a dead end. But we definitely have to factor in how uh, access to these parking lots, for example, and the community centers are still going to be able to continue. But yeah, there's definitely something that we could do to have maybe a different route, maybe coming off 4 Mile Run Drive, or maybe even using this as just one massive intersection. But it's pretty tricky given all these driveways, and you have a lot of these industrial uses that don't have any intention of moving anytime soon. So it's really tricky to balance everyone's needs and all the stakeholders involved. And we have been talking with our traffic engineers, and they're really hesitant to have any kind of stop control at 27th Street. Basically replacing our RFB with a full signalized intersection, given especially how close it is to this one at 4 Mile Run Drive. But yeah, definitely want to take a look at all options on the table.
Pam, is your hand up? Or maybe it's up from before.
No, and I forgot to turn my mic on. Thank you. I was agreeing with Chris and Eric. Thank you very much. My fantasy had been that that there is a crosswalk at Adams Mill going over Shirlington Road, but it doesn't go anywhere. I'm not quite sure what's there. My fantasy would be that I could actually use that crosswalk, and there would be a sidewalk on the east side of Shirlington Road right there on the bridge part, so I could actually get to the trail. That would solve all of our problems. But yeah, the trouble with Shirlington Road is it's 4 lanes. And the drivers really can't see the flashing beacon in the daytime, which is mainly when I'm going over there. And maybe the first car will stop, but there's no guarantee any of the other lanes are going to stop. And it's really scary. You get out there and, the first car stops and then you can't go anywhere. You have to go backwards, go back to the trail. So, yeah, it's a real traffic light would be wonderful. Figuring out how to have a sidewalk on the other side would be wonderful. But yeah, it needs work. And it's a really important connection for all of us, especially when we go to Shirlington. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's just so worrisome with the magnificent playground right there. I mean, there's so many more children and families crossing now. Could we get rid of the flashing beacon? Just if we wanted to do something fast, would that be in the realm of the possible? Or, and add automatic enforcement cameras like right away, or add speed tables right away? Are there things we could do in the near term, like next week, instead of waiting 5 years or whatever until the study is done and it's in the capital budget and all this?
Yeah, Pamela brought up a really good point that it's sometimes difficult to see the crosswalk, especially at night. So one thing that we could probably do sooner is increase the visibility, not just through lighting, but also having more markings, but also finding ways to slow down traffic, like that was previously mentioned. Uh, having things improvements such as like the rumble strips, or finding some ways to maybe like shrink the lanes through like different kind of markings. Yeah, it's pretty tricky with getting things that are temporary, especially with people who are coming off the interstate. They're driving pretty quickly. So in terms of slowing them down and making sure that they're obeying traffic laws, that they're yielding to people walking and biking, it requires much more capital intensive projects through the use of like concrete or some kind of other intervention beyond just like paint on the ground, which I agree is not enough.
Can we bar right turns off of the interstate and make those cars go straight uh, and take a slightly different route so that they cannot take a slip lane onto Shirlington Road?
Yeah, that to me, that's one of the biggest issues. Like, we shouldn't be doing slip lanes at all, period. Because, as everyone in this room is aware, like that just maintains traffic speeds, and it incentivizes people to drive quickly without slowing down. So when they see this crosswalk, they probably just don't even bother. So if I had a magic wand, that would probably be one of the first things I would do here.
Yeah. Dina.
Yeah. Do you have, given that there's, the county line is right there, has Alexandria just given you authority to do whatever you want, or is this gonna, get hung up? Because I think the Exxon station's actually in Alexandria.
Yeah, that's a really important question. I unfortunately don't have an answer to that. For now, that we're just doing internal data collection. But working with our neighbors to the south is definitely going to be critical, because this bridge, these crossings don't just affect us; it affects everyone who uses the trail, especially people who are biking from Alexandria. Yeah, I'm sure that they're aware of that problem as well. But yeah, thank you for that comment. That's something that we need to incorporate.
Steve.
Yeah, I mean, what about if you're thinking about some relatively short-term things, can you make the crosswalk itself raised? I mean, that forces traffic to, I mean, the first time maybe they don't notice it, but the second time they go over it at 25, they're going to notice that they hit a big bump, and then in future they might need to be slowing down more. And likewise with the slip lane, is there a way to force drivers in the slip lane to go a lot slower as they hit the slip lane, like with an actual speed hump or something like that, so they can't take the slip lane at 30 miles an hour? So that just provides more time for them to see if there happens to be the beacon flashing or people or anything. But that is one of the biggest problems, is as they take that slip lane, particularly if they don't need to slow down for traffic in front of them, they're just going to continue along at whatever speed they're at. And then the crosswalk is pretty shortly after that. So they don't have a lot of time to realize that they're now in a completely different world than driving on the expressway.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we can incorporate. Beyond when we look at short-term to long-term solutions, removing the slip lane is definitely something that could be included as part of that package of solutions. If we wind up going down the route of having some kind
Right, I
of
wasn't talking about removing the slip lane. I'm talking about making the drivers on the slip lane aware that they need to be much slower, such as putting a speed hump in the slip lane or the rumble strips, or narrowing it up significantly. Something, because removing the slip lane is years away. And as Cynthia mentioned, you were just asking, what can you do now? And so I'm saying, what can you do now? So removing the slip lane is a great idea, but that's not going to happen next week.
Right.
I love both of those ideas, putting a rumble strip or speed table in the slip lane, and also having a raised crosswalk. I think those could be done really quick if Arlington wanted to proceed. Dana.
Yeah. How about just what about putting another just an automatic sensor for the rapid flash beacon? Yeah. So when a cyclist or a ped walks up to it, it just goes off. You know, and you could also then put move another one and put an auxiliary one down there aiming at the slip lane, so the people in the slip lane see it. You give them a better chance.
Yeah, that's something we'll share with our project management team. One thing that they would probably push back on is, if how sensitive would the sensor be, for example, if it's someone who is walking down the trail, maybe heading to this bus stop, for example, would that trigger the beacon? I don't want to say no to that, but just something that we need to consider. And in a perfect world like that would be perfectly timed with the intersections, like what we do with lead pedestrian intervals. So, you wouldn't even have to push a button. But this is something we want to talk about further.
So do you think maybe the study team can join us at this next BAC meeting and talk about um, the official start of the study and what they propose and which of these immediate suggestions might work for the intervening months or years before the study is completed and implemented?
Yeah, for sure. We could have our team come on board for the next meeting, especially with the traffic engineer who would give much more a better analysis than I could. And
That would be wonderful. This is such a priority with that new playground and with this beautiful weather. It's just really worrisome that something could happen.
yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else? Shall we move on?
I'll just make the one last comment that when the whole thing was rebuilt and went under 395 and it was all done, I was really surprised that the trail was not routed under Sterlington Road. It just seemed like a complete oversight opportunity to just put it right under. And now, now that was a missed opportunity. And I realized that was probably before you were around, Elwin, but I remember when it was all done, I thought, well, that was silly. Why didn't they just put it under Sterlington too? They put it under everything else. Would have made perfect sense.
Yeah, I agree. If we're going to be tearing up the roads and moving dirt, we might as well just make this a comprehensive project instead of, coming back and trying to work things with this design. Like this should have been done a long time ago. I agree 100%.
All right. Well, we will look forward to continued discussions, and hopefully everyone will be safe in the interim. Thank you so much. And next we have Leah. We'll talk about DES design standards.
Yeah, so I think catching up on the email chain today, it sounded like we were going to have maybe a discussion of just general trail standards today and then talk about questions to figure out what staff needs to come to a future meeting. So I can kind of just break it down. I think it was kind of three main categories, just from looking at the agenda. The first being design standards regarding trails. So I think the first kind of thing regarding trails, there's kind of some old standards and some new standards. So I think the first thing to mention is that to kind of improve some of the coordination to make sure our standards are cohesive, we do have a trail coordination team that I think I've mentioned a few times. It includes people from DES, specifically transportation engineering and operations, and then transportation planning as well, and then also individuals from the Department of Parks and Recreation. A lot of what we've done is kind of spent time coordinating projects and also answering questions about trail standards. We don't have one document that we follow. A lot of the time in the master transportation plan, for example, it'll say if you're building a trail on if you're doing an extension of the Custis Trail and you have this amount of volume, it needs to be, 12 feet wide, for example. And this is an issue at times because we don't have, an exact amount of, width for every time we're having a new trail. So this is something that the trails coordination team is getting into. I think maybe someday we'll have kind of more set trail design standards that are coming out. But we do have right now kind of these trail crossing standards, and that's been very helpful. They're specifically for unsignalized trail crossings. And, there are some kind of guidelines here, like trails shall be a minimum of 10 feet wide, but a preferred width of at least 12 feet. They can be up to 16 feet wide, once again, depending on user volumes. And we get these volumes from David Patton, who does kind of the bike count program and also does ped counts as well. So for example, if we want to extend a trail and it's having, really high volumes like the Custis or WNOD, that would be something that would lean, closer to 16 feet. That's kind of a core element of these trail crossing guidelines. Another is having an accessible curb ramp where the trail crosses a road. The minimum width of the ramp should be the width of the trail. So for example, if you have a 10-foot trail, you should have a 10-foot curb ramp, not including the wing flares. So the part that kind of goes out from the center. The preferred ramp width for trails is 12 feet or more, because when you think about trails, you have cyclists coming in either directions, you have pedestrians and scooters as well. So the wider the curb ramp, the more people are going to be able to kind of safely make that crossing without having to worry about kind of running into each other. Another core element of this kind of unsignalized trail crossing is 10 feet or more wide, high visibility crossings. So, these are kind of the white marks that you see across general crossings in the county, but just making sure that they are high visibility. And it goes into details on, like spacing between lines and things like that. Talking about a stop sign and a stop bar on the trail in both directions as well. There's also, guidelines when you talk about a center line that, when you're approaching an intersection, it needs to be solid because you don't want people passing each other on the trail right before an intersection, because that could lead to issues. There's also, should be a combined bike pedestrian warning along the road in each direction to alert drivers. So that's a sign based for people driving to let them know that there is a trail crossing ahead. We have the, typical downward diagonal arrow plaque below the warning sign. A signal warning sign can be used on the right side of the road, but if more visibility is needed, they can be on both sides of the road, things like that. And then a bike route sign is recommended as a core element as well. And then a no motor vehicle sign is also recommended. So there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 kind of core elements to the general guidance for unsignalized trail crossings. And then there's enhanced elements as well. So like that would be like stop markings or, slow markings on the trail, stop ahead signage, like kind of things like that. And there's, places with low, road user yield compliance. So drivers who aren't yielding, you have trail crossing markings, green markings, where the bike path and walking path are separate. You have RFB, just a lot of kind of things that we can do in the street. Specifically, I'm thinking about like the Arlington Boulevard Trail, where you have some of those off and on ramps. Those are the places we're really focusing some of these kind of new unsignalized trail crossing design guidelines at. That was my spiel on trails. And are there any questions on that at first? Dana said, how are the curb ramp widths confirmed? The ramps at the Arlington side of the new West Glee Bridge seem to be too narrow. That's something that's confirmed in design. I know there were some issues with the construction of the curb ramps, so I can follow up with Jason on that. The WNOD crossings in Falls Church are poor, where the push cyclists and walkers runners together. I hope we don't get that with the planned WNOD upgrades. I think with the planned WNOD upgrades, there will be very large curb ramps.
I had a question. So what determines who gets the stop sign? Um, whether it's the drivers or those traveling by foot or bicycle?
Yeah, so if it's an unsignalized trail crossing, based on this document, trail users would get the stop sign. Because people on the road do not have a stop sign.
And is that open for discussion, or
We've been having some
is it going to
discussions about,
stay that way?
so it's interesting you bring it up because we've been having some discussions on the trails coordination team. So for example, it's on the Custis Trail uphill. If you're coming, you know, kind of from Rosslyn, there's like what it's like Quinn Street. So you're going uphill, and there's been some issues. Like I almost got hit the other day on the way to work. But I, as a cyclist, am not going to stop as I'm going up the Custis Trail for a car and then keep, you know, get that momentum and go again. So we're having some discussions on like situations. But at that situation, for example, the car has a stop sign. So they should be the ones to stop. It kind of depends on, you know, for example, for the yield or the off ramps from like Route 50, they may not have a stop sign. So then it kind of goes on the trail user. But if the car has a stop sign, they would be like expected to yield. But then you have all these situations and it gets confusing. So kind of our goal is we want to make it pretty just cohesive and universal. So you're not like stopping at one but yielding at another, but then cars can go, because it just gets confusing for drivers and it gets confusing for users. So we need to just kind of have a basic set of rules that applies to kind of all trail crossings, which is what we're working on now, slowly but surely.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree. So for instance, I remember many years ago, when Dave Goodman was still around, we were talking about the 3 crossings on the Bluemont Junction Trail between Ballston and George Mason. So the first one, I can't remember the street, it's like Wakefield or something like that. There are virtually no vehicles on that. And so there was a conversation, what if we turn the stop sign around and make the stop sign for the drivers and through for the trail users? And then the next one was more like, you know, kind of a 50-50. And then the one in Kensington, you know, now we have this sort of raised humpy crossing, and there, you know, there's bad sight lines. I mean, that's not the best crossing, period. There's a lot of issues with that one. But the first one was kind of a clear signal, like this is a no-brainer. We should just make, because there are way more people walking their dogs and their strollers and everything than there are vehicles driving there. There's almost no vehicles, and they should just have the stop sign. So I think there's a little bit of contextualization that needs to be included, and not just try to use a one size fits all at every single intersection.
Yeah, I think when I talk about the one size fits all, it's like stopping versus yielding on the trail versus cars. And I think a lot of it depends on volumes, like you just mentioned, and also Chris put it in the chat. So like, for example, you know, cars aren't going to yield when you're coming off cars aren't going to be expected to fully stop coming off an off ramp of Arlington Boulevard. But, you know, on a smaller street, yeah, they're going to be expected to stop because it's wherever the volumes are heavier, essentially. Any other questions on trails? I think the next one is sidewalks. Okay. I guess just moving on to sidewalks. I think, I don't know, I kind of figured we're maybe talking about width, but we can kind of get into that more. So essentially, when we're talking about sidewalks, there's essentially kind of 2 standards we're following, specifically when we're talking about ADA compliance. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act. So essentially, there's ADAG, which is kind of what's enacted right now. So this is the Americans with Disabilities Act accessibility guidelines from 2010. And I think just the minimum widths are a little less than PROAG, which I'll talk about in a minute. So like, for example, you know, a minimum width with ADAG could even be down to 3 feet. which, as we know, is really, really narrow. So what the county is kind of doing is relying more on what's called PROAG. And this is kind of a draft public rights of way guideline, so it hasn't been approved. It has to be approved by the FHWA kind of before it's enacted. But it's definitely more updated and kind of goes above ADAG. So a lot of the times, we may have, something that's a 5-foot minimum sidewalk. But for example, if it's by a school, if we know there's heavy ped volumes, we're going to push to have a 6-foot minimum. When it comes to development, it can be hard because they can kind of come back and say, well, PROAG hasn't been kind of mandated yet, but then we can also kind of go back to the pedestrian element, which is helpful as well. So I would say it's kind of a combination between ADAG, PROAG, and then the pedestrian element. And then a lot of the times, sector plans will talk about sidewalk widths, and then you'll also have GLUPs that will have sidewalk widths as well. So it's kind of taking all of that, kind of tying it together. I think really the only time that it's been pretty hard to kind of get a sidewalk is when there's like an old growth tree has been the time it's been really challenging. But DPR has been really great on doing some kind of flexible pavement treatments. So, they may not use concrete specifically, but we can use kind of more permeable, flexible pavements, kind of get that width and maintain the tree, which has been really great. We've had that on some neighborhood streets recently, and that's turned out pretty well. And then I think the last one was curb ramps. And it's kind of similar with basically using ADA, so ADAG and PROAG. But then with curb ramps specifically, and I guess sidewalks as well, we have to follow VDOT standards as well, specifically. And then we have these horizontal standards where we have a few details specifically for curb extensions. And that's usually something that'll be integrated into whether that's, a development review. So if it's a private development, we can go and say, these are the horizontal design standards. You need to widen this curb ramp or have a wing flare, etc. Or, if it's something that's being designed internally, those are applied as well. And I should say those are also the space challenges come from those, I would say, just from what I've seen personally, the most when there's a utility next to a curb ramp. So for example, if there's a fire hydrant next to a curb ramp or there's a utility pole or a light post, that's when I've seen curb ramps narrowed or even a wing flare cut out, which when you think about it, doesn't quite make sense because you need the 2 wing flares to be able to kind of go up and then access either side. If you don't have a wing flare, really you can only go straight if you're using any sort of assistive device.
Chris, why don't you go ahead?
Cool. Yeah. On curb ramps, I had kind of 2 questions, and I totally understand if you need to take them away and come back. But I think my first one is it still seems like from time to time we get the kind of ramp that sort of there's just one of them and it's kind of on the diagonal of the intersection, sort of seems to direct you out into traffic.
Yeah.
And I keep hoping to understand. I'm sure somebody must have a design standard that like prefers that because it doesn't keep happening by chance. So I would love to understand where that comes from and why every once in a while we still get something like that. And then my other one is totally understand that sometimes the sort of channelized curb ramps are necessary, but I would love help understanding like what those are. Like what is it that the engineer encounters where they're like, oh, we can't do the standard, with the wings and the whatnot, we've really got to do it channelized in this. That would be super helpful.
Yeah. I think the first question regarding kind of the directing out into the street, I will take that back and give you an answer from an engineer because I've also asked that question and they say it much more eloquently than what I'm going to attempt. So I will just send you that in an email or bring it to the next BAC meeting. because it has to do with like curb radii and just very engineering heavy things. Second, with channelization, just from my experience, and I can also ask this as well, is generally when it's just really, really constrained by utilities. Like the one example I'm thinking of is on Crystal Drive. Essentially, it was like there's planters behind it with trees, and there was a hydrant or a fire pole. Like we pushed back so hard on not having that channelized, but they didn't want to move the utilities and they didn't want to tear down the trees. So it should only be when it's just really constrained by utilities, right of way and kind of tree canopy from what I've noticed. But if there's a definitive answer, I'll bring that back and ask them as well.
Thanks so much, Leah.
Mhm.
Thank you, Dana. I know you had some issues in the chat, and I
Yeah,
see your
I'll
hand.
I'll let the issues in the chat. Yeah, Leah can take a swing at those later.
Yeah.
Specifically, what about aligning the crosswalks with the curb ramps? Again, I offer West Glebe as a good example. When the fact that you don't go directly down the curb ramp, the crosswalk, we're not doing anybody any favors.
Yeah, I think it cut out for 1 second, but I think you were just saying that. Is it kind of similar to what Chris was saying, where you're kind of coming out into the street
Well,
and then?
the ramp's going down, at some angle, and then the crosswalk for some reason is at a different angle.
Oh yeah, okay.
So if you were walking, riding, or using a wheelchair, you'd have to actually do a maneuver to
Yeah.
stay in the crosswalk. They should be lined up, so you're just shooting straight across.
Yeah, agreed. I will bring that question back. And then I saw that in the chat, for the really bad curb ramps in Arlington, is there a list of those ramps? Is there a plan to take those ramps that are problems and replace them? What about curb ramps or aprons on VDOT roads? There is not a list of really bad curb ramps that I'm aware of. I think that's something maybe we could task kind of new staff with, because it just keeps coming up. I think there is kind of an effort through Vision Zero to kind of replace those over time or replace them through redevelopment. But I know there's some that may be kind of in neighborhoods and spots where there's not going to be redevelopment that, just need to be replaced. And then I think a lot of them are along maybe VDOT roads or roads that we don't own, which we would just kind of need to work with VDOT on that. But yeah, I don't think there's really essentially a bad curb ramp list right now. There is a list of what's called like all in-street devices. It's a map that transportation engineering and operations has. And there was some discussion about adding curb ramps onto that with a status or condition. I'm not sure if that is still in the works, so I can check back on that and see if that's something they're still doing.
And if there's anything that we could do, like compile a list of our most hated
That would
curb ramps.
that would be amazing, because one of the kind of capital improvement funds that I oversee is called PDSI. It's pedestrian spot improvements, and that's exactly what it does. Essentially, it's set up in a way that it would just improve curb ramps, or sidewalks, for example, what I'm doing now. A lot of those are kind of in coordination with Vision Zero quick build projects. So right now, for example, I think the capital fund it's funding about 5 different projects throughout the county that are all kind of curb ramp upgrades, crossing upgrades. So we are doing that now, but it would be interesting to kind of hear about how, I guess people's experiences and how that overlaps with what we're doing through Vision Zero quick build projects.
I think we all have some coming to mind, so maybe we could make a list.
That would be really helpful, actually.
Okay. Eric Goodman.
Yeah, with regard to curb ramps, and I think that we sort of alluded to it, but the parallel curb ramp is the one that's a real problem. When you cross, there's a curb in front of you and you have to do like a 90-degree turn right in.
Yeah.
the sidewalk, which is really difficult for anything, a scooter or, anything that's a little bit longer to make that 90-degree turn is very difficult.
Yeah, yeah. I'll add that to the list to bring back to the engineers.
And for some of them, you have to slow down so much that you worry,
Yeah.
like if someone's behind you, or I mean, it's just really awkward to get into that 90-degree mode.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Pam.
Curb ramps. Following up on what Chris and Dana were asking about, my specific concern, I have two concerns. Is there actually a requirement, legal guidance, general guidance that the county follows that the curb ramps should be aligned with the crosswalk? I constantly raise those SPRCs and people look at me like I'm crazy. It's like, but if they're not aligned and you're in a wheelchair or if you're, vision impaired, you end up in the middle of the intersection. It is absolutely essential that they be aligned. And I don't know why are plans even being promoted that don't have this?
Yeah.
Whether it's a county plan or a developer plan, that makes no sense. The other thing that I have heard from somebody in my community is there's a new substance for curb ramps that Boston is using, and it's metal, I think.
Oh.
And does the county have guidance on what their preferences are for the actual substance that the curb ramp is? I mean, I love the colorful kind of plastic ones. They're certainly better than the concrete ones that we used to have that break and have weeds growing through them. The other question is about for the crosswalk and I guess sidewalks, what they're made of. Is the county really pushing for concrete over bricks? Crystal City loves bricks, and they're just awful for pedestrians. Thank you.
I'm writing all this down. I would have to check. I think like our standard is just concrete. But I can see if there's any flexibility on that. I don't know if that's included in the standards yet. I'll have to look at what Boston's doing as well. That's interesting.
I'll send you a link, and probably
Yeah.
would like to know about all these sidewalk things too.
Yeah. And then I think the legal requirement regarding if a curb ramp should be aligned with a crosswalk, that's kind of related to some of the other questions asked. So I'll bring that back as well. I think like I mentioned before, it has to do with just like curb radii, because sometimes, if I'm looking at a plan and you have one curb ramp, at a crossing and you just kind of in between the two crosswalks, I do wonder why it's just not two pointed in the same direction. So I can get some clarification on the kind of design guidelines behind that. I think there's about 5 minutes left, and I know Ellen and I just have one thing we have to announce to the group from Bob Upson. So that's it.
Go for it.
Let me look it up really quick. Bob wanted us to tell you this up. So essentially look this up. Sorry, I've been out of office. So I have quite a few emails. Basically, there's going to be some work that's starting Monday, April 17th, that'll last about a week. Let me pull this up. On 4 Mile Run by South Glebe. Basically, the contractor is repairing some outfall pipes of the Apex Apartments on South Glebe Road, and they'll be preparing an MOT to get the kind of necessary right-of-way permits. But he wanted to discuss with us because there'll be a partial closure of the 4 Mile Run trail during the week. So there will be an MOT. I have not gotten it yet, but just a heads up, that 4 Mile Run trail kind of by South Glebe will have an MOT for about a week starting the 17th. That's all I have.
I hope it is
Why
a
don't they just,
well-marked and reasonable detour.
why don't they just close Glebe Road instead?
Sure.
And where will that MOT be published?
It's published on the DPR Trails webpage that I will find a link to, but they did not include in this email.
So, if I remember, is Bob the gentleman who came last time to talk about the trails? Right.
Yes.
So, just a little annoyance that I pointed out this problem with the Washington Boulevard Trail. It has water on it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I put it on the reporter problem. And he specifically asked, please let me know. And I get back to him. He says, well, it hasn't rained. I said, well, the water's there 24/7. It's there all the time. So if you could just remind him that would be great to go check. It looks like there's a real problem there of some sort of a leakage of a pipe. And, and in the winter it would freeze and about half the trail is unusable. Maybe a third of the trail is unusable 24/7 because there's water and leaves and everything. It hasn't even been cleared off. And so I guess I'm a little annoyed that he came and asked us to give input and then he literally has done nothing about that.
What is the location? Washington Boulevard Trail.
I think I sent him a point. It's on the reporter problem. It's on the Washington Boulevard Trail. The one that on the East Washington Boulevard Trail, not the one by the Pentagon. Between right before that little bridge before you go up to Towers Park.
Oh, okay.
So if you're going east or south on the trail, it's before you get to that bridge and before the rise up to Towers Park.
Okay.
I mean, you can't miss it. I mean, you're right along the trail. It's just covered with water. I mean, it's completely and totally obvious. He clearly has not gone out there and looked in the months since we had the last meeting.
Yeah, my guess is because I think he talked about a little bit at the last meeting about he just has a really small team and they have a lot on their plate right now. I think specifically with clearing kind of all the brush off the trails from the winter and getting ready for spring. But I'll flag that and talk with them.
Yeah, I mean, well, that would be a perfect example of a place where there was stuff on the trail from winter, and now it's spring. So
yeah, I'll flag that for him.
Okay, thanks.
I just have a couple things. If folks have burning issues or topics that they would like to discuss at the next meeting or at future meetings, don't hesitate to get in touch. We all keep running lists and try to see what we can squeeze in. So please let me know if you have topics. And second, some of us were thinking about having some summer happy hours, perhaps even starting in May. We could do them outside and talk bikes because it would be great since these meetings are all online. It would be really great to actually interact. So if there's interest in that, we can maybe set something up starting next month. So anyone else have items, issues that they want to raise?
Yeah, this is Dana. I'm going to follow back up with Dominion about the boardwalk on Glebe, the Dominion Glebe project, and highlight the fact that that it is slippery, and they need to work a little bit more on it, and they need to also work on on fixing the detour on Route 1 when they put that back into play. Because I've gotten a bunch of comments from various writers saying, identifying the problems. So I'm going to follow up with Dominion probably tomorrow.
Now, should we invite them to come back and meet with us about it, talk with us, or do you think?
Well, the person I'm working with is in Richmond. We can probably do that, or I think I have a pretty good relationship with her, and I think it'll probably get stuff done if we just avoid bringing them in for a flogging.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much for handling that. Anyone else? All right. It's 9:01, so I guess we better finish up. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks for all the really good discussions.
Thanks all.
Thank
Thank
you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Oh, wait, I
Good
think
night.
Raymond has a hand up.
Thank
yeah.
you all.
Raymond.
That was just an accident. Thank you
Oh.
so much. Yeah, no worries. But while I have everyone here, sign up for Bike to Work Day, May 19th, Bike to Work Day.
Awesome.
Put in your long-range comments by midnight tonight. Links in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.